Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Phil Swan. I'm one of the business development managers within the Continuing Professional Development Unit at Cardiff University. So welcome to the third session of the second week of our spring online school organised by the CPD unit. It's great to have so many of you join us this afternoon. While we're just waiting for the last few people to join us, let me just run you through some housekeeping. So if you have any technical issues during the session, any sound issues, anything of that sort of nature, please feel free to use the chat feature to the organisers, and we'll do our best to assist you in any way we can. If your Wi-Fi drops out, I'm conscious everyone's probably working at home like we are at the moment, so if your Wi-Fi drops out, please just reuse the link you have for the session and we'll readmit you. We've got people in the background on standby to do this, so you won't interrupt the flow of the session in any way. We're going to be doing some short questions and answers session at the very end of the session for Rebecca, so please feel free to post your questions in the Q&A part of the Zoom meeting at the very bottom there on the right hand side, and we'll collate those questions and put those to Rebecca at the end of the session. And finally, we are going to be recording this session and uploading the content on our YouTube channel, where we've got a back catalogue of various sessions that we've run as part of this spring online school, and also a version we done last summer as well. There's some really great stuff on there, so I'd encourage you all to take a look, and we'll email you out a link after this session. So I think that's it from me. Thank you for everyone for logging onto the session, and I'll pass you over to our fantastic speaker, Dr. Rebecca Scott. Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you so much. Okay, welcome everybody. I'm just going to start off by sharing my screen 1 second. Okay, so it's such a pleasure to be sharing this really exciting topic with all of you. So my name is Rebecca Scott. I'm a senior lecturer in marketing at Cardiff Business School. My area of research, I specialise in the social and cultural aspects of consumption, and much of the work that I do is orientated around the body, such as looking at things like why do consumers pay for experiences that they know will be physically painful. What I'm going to share with you today, I was actually introduced to just a few months ago through this book that I read that you're seeing on the front of this slide, Humour Seriously: Why Humour is a Secret Weapon in Business and in Life. Now, importantly, I am not claiming to be an expert in this area. This is something that's quite new to me, but I guess through my platform in education and research as well, I really want to be a protagonist for the value and importance of humour at work and also in our life. So hopefully today I'm going to share with you some stories, some examples, and some day-to-day practices of things you can do to really inject a bit of levity into your day-to-day work. So why is humour at work on the agenda? So there's three key pieces to this. Research finds that humour has a profound impact on human psychology and behaviour. The authors of this book, and one thing I will add is humour at work, this topic is on the Stanford MBA program. So it actually gets the same amount of credit points than something such as accounting would get. So that is how, I guess, reliable and poignant this research is. So the authors believe that this emerging field might become one of the greatest competitive advantages in business. And thirdly, research shows when we refuse to take ourselves so seriously, we relieve ourselves from the stress standing in the way of serious work. We create more meaningful connections with our colleagues, and we open our minds to more innovative solutions. So before I jump into this presentation, I really want you to be able to really ground this in your own experience in day-to-day life. So to do that, I'm going to stop share for just a second. I'm going to share now in the chat box a link to Mentimeter. So if you just click on this link, this is just a nice interactive way where we can kind of test the temperature in the Zoom room at the moment as to how humour shows up for us in our day-to-day life. So I'm going to share the Mentimeter screen now. Okay, so hopefully, okay, let's get to the. Okay, brilliant. Who or what makes you laugh the most in your life? So I love that straight away we're getting some traction with this question. We've got kids, friends seems to be the most popular choice, dog and husband. I was expecting pets, so glad to see this. My dad, brother, my son, 2 years old, he thinks he's hilarious. Lucky to have a 2-year-old in your life, fabulous. Friends. Good, so friends seem to be quite a popular choice. Love of God, I wasn't expecting religion, but great to see that come in here. My partner, my husband, quirks with the dog. Yeah, I think animals are a never-ending source of humor. Odd, embarrassing situations and my little dog. Husband. Good, okay. Let's press on to the next question. Who do you feel the funniest around? Who do you feel the funniest around? Husband, daughters, friends, close friends. Okay, so essentially it seems like friends, family. So friends and husbands are looking good at the moment for causing the most humor. And it seems essentially the people that are kind of in your immediate vicinity, where I'm safe. That's a nice insight. Old grannies, yeah, I'm actually with my 87-year-old granny at the moment, and she is the best source of comedy in our family. Good, okay. Next question, what holds you back from using humor at work? And if nothing holds you back from humor at work, that's great. Just say nothing holds me back, or perhaps why nothing holds you back. Wow, so we've got a very clear response with this one. We got two sides of the coin. Okay, manager, offending people, good. Okay, I think that's a very understandable, real kind of popular hurdle that we, none of us want to offend anyone. I'm sure many people on this call are British, so I think that's quite a British trait. We don't want to upset anyone. Nothing, brilliant. So it seems like most people are already readily using humor in their day-to-day lives in a big way. So I love the fact that nothing is the biggest, most popular word in this cloud. And then obviously we've got a lot of other nuance surrounding this according to different personalities. Lessening your power is an interesting point. We're going to talk about how humor is used in the organizational hierarchy in this session. Not aware of a sense of humor. Okay, so perhaps not being able to read the room and read the context. We're going to talk about using humor in different contexts and how to navigate that today. Dignity, that's an interesting one. Embarrassment. Damage credibility, absolutely. We're going to speak about that, how there's some kind of perhaps misconceptions around humor. Thanks, everybody. This is really rich. When was the last time you really laughed? I think this session is happening at quite a nice time on the Monday afternoon post-weekend. So hopefully, good. I like that weekend's coming up a lot. 2 weeks ago, that seems like quite a while ago. 1 second ago, excellent. That means you laughed in this prezzo or at your own answers. So that's delightful to hear. Last weekend, every day at different things. This is so good to see. This morning, a weekend away, Saturday. Good, so most of you, yesterday, brilliant. Sundays seem like funny days. Excellent. When was the last time you made someone else laugh? This morning, good. You guys are starting Mondays with a bang. Today, yesterday, quite recent. This is good to see, the weekend. Right now, I'm glad that this is already a source of amusement. I hope it continues to deliver as we go on. Yesterday, last weekend, my kids laugh at me all the time. Fantastic. I think if you've got little ones and pets in your life, you're never far away from laughter. Yesterday, my granddaughter, about 20 minutes ago, tickling my son. Lovely to see this kind of day-to-day joyful levity practices happening. Okay, so the reason I ran these questions is because I wanted you to really ground your individual experience in this presentation and this discussion about humor and how it's used or not used or misused perhaps in our work lives. So that prompts this question: what surprised you about how you answered these questions? So a reflexive point now. That you laugh a lot, that's fantastic. Laughter is mostly linked to my home life, not work. That's an interesting thing to sit with. Humor, mainly outside work. Yep, you're not alone. This comes up a lot in the research. How much I do laugh, did not realize it. That's a nice learning. Oh, there seems to be a theme. I find joy in every day, but not at work. When I'm at home, I laugh more. Oh, so you're surprised that you're prepared to be honest. Maybe this topic makes us feel a bit more relaxed and able to reflect in a more honest way. How much we all laugh, even stuck at home and in the middle of a pandemic, yes. I don't really remember when I actually laughed freely. Yep, you're not alone. This is quite a common thing for people, not to recall. Okay, so this shows awareness. I can't remember laughing at situations easily, but think that they are there. So this is a beautiful point, because I think for whoever posted this, just learning a little bit about levity. So in being in a state where you're open to and aware of potential situations that could be humorous, this could be quite valuable for you. So we're going to touch on levity a bit at the beginning. I laugh at home more. How I judge what laughing is, and crying and hilarious or just a chuckle. Also, I want to laugh more. Good. Well, hopefully everybody, by the end of this session, you will have more tools in the toolkit to laugh a bit more and also sort of spread that joy to other people. So I'm now going to stop share on the Mentimeter. And let's jump back into sharing on the PowerPoint. So I really appreciate your honesty. That does take, it can be quite confronting, especially when you're like, oh, I really don't remember. Like, I don't honestly remember the last time that I belly laughed, like really laugh when you're just kind of crying. So it's a good thing to kind of ponder on. Okay, so class objectives. Laughter is powerful. We're going to look at why is humor so powerful? Why is humor underutilized in the workplace? And how can we use more of it better? Before we understand how using humor at work can really help us in our work lives, we need to kind of understand why it's holding us back. And the research kind of reveals quite a lot of myths that do hold us back. This is just a 60-minute session, so I'm really kind of giving you the highlights of the research. So one of those myths that is found to be holding us back from really embracing humor at work is what's known as the serious business myth. So this is the belief that humor has got no place amongst quote unquote serious work. And there's this worry amongst people that using humor will harm our credibility. This point nicely came up in the Mentimeter survey. So it will harm our credibility and it will mean that we're not going to be taken seriously at work. But the research actually finds that by showing our sense of humor can actually make our co-workers devote higher status to us and then elevate us into leadership roles. In today's business world, we are facing a crisis of trust. More than half of employees cite their lack of trust in leadership as the biggest factor impacting their work performance. And today's workforce are looking for authentic human leaders. Aspirational, yes, but also flawed. Importantly, humor humanizes us to our colleagues. It breaks down barriers and it balances authority with approachability. For example, leaders that use just a little bit of self-deprecating humor are rated higher in terms of trust and leadership ability to their employees. So us academics like to kind of front our narratives with what's the problem and what's the proposed solution. So what's the problem here is that many of us intuitively understand humor, as we've seen with that sort of Mentimeter engagement. We all understand humor. What's beautiful about humor, it's universal. But how that shows up and how it manifests varies widely across different people, different cultures, different backgrounds. So although as a collective of people, we understand intuitively what humor is, few of us know how to harness the power of humor with strategic intention. So the solution here, and what I hope to shed just a little bit of light on with today's discussion, is to unpack the benefits of humor for our careers and for our businesses. So the research finds that the lack of levity in our work lives has dire consequences for our physical health, for our relationships, and also for our relationships with our teams within the companies that we work for. And the solution and the insights that I'm going to share with you today, this is informed by behavioral scientists, neuroscientists, and also comedians. So in summary, studies show that humor can increase creativity, it can improve health, and it improves and enhances relationships, all of which have a really positive effect on the world around us as well. So in the Mentimeter quiz, I asked you, when was the last time you really laughed? Most of you, of course, laughed pretty recently, perhaps this morning or in the last day or two. That was amazing to see. That's not what I was expecting. So the average 4-year-old, you might be interested to learn, laughs as many as 300 times a day. Those of you that have young children probably will not be surprised to learn this. But comparatively, the average 40-year-old laughs 300 times every 2 to 5 months. So we're seeing a huge gap there in terms of laughter and age brackets. So why is this? There's a lot of sort of reasons behind this, but in context, in terms of the workforce, as we grow up, we enter the world of work and we become serious business people. And to a degree, many of us lose levity in the sea of slide decks, conference calls, problem solving, and this is a real shame because levity at work has got so many powerful competitive advantages. The next section of the presentation, I'm going to talk you through practical ways that you could literally put your funny to work today. So please feel free to make notes. Hopefully some of this is, just very user friendly. And I can tell you some stories as well that will sort of add a bit of color to this. So first off, I really want you to be clear on what we mean by levity. So levity is a state of being receptive to and looking for humor. Okay, so almost like the pre state before humor. So it is different to humor. So I'm sure many of you may be feeling, the idea of being funny at work could be a little bit overwhelming or uncomfortable. So at this point, we're going to really lower the bar. So the goal here isn't to tell jokes and be funny per se, but simply to make more human connections and be more productive and effective at work by really kind of easing yourself into this lovely state of levity. So there are very small tactical ways in which humor can help us navigate critical crossroads at work, such as saying difficult things or making difficult decisions. But strategically placed levity can really help shift mindsets and create productive work. So in terms of communicating with levity, research shows that the words we use at work matter and shape the culture of our workplace. And this is known as the superior Whorf hypothesis. So at a time like at the moment when remote work just seems the norm for many of us, and digital modes of communication such as what we're doing right now on Zoom have almost replaced this sort of intimate, humorous water cooler talk that we once had, finding ways to bond with our co-workers, it's not as easy as it used to be. And that means that our written words have got to do more of the heavy lifting. So many of our written communications are communicating, but they're failing to create the human connection. For instance, many of us may be writing emails that are effective in getting a point across, but they're actually perhaps a little robotic, maybe a little clinical. So why have we bought into the belief that professional communications need to be devoid of personality? So I'm going to answer this question with a short story from Deloitte. So in 2003, the company's then CMO, Brian Fugere, created a product to help strip stale jargon that had become prevalent throughout the company, both internally between employees and externally with clients. So this idea was born because they were seen as, they had a real need to improve Deloitte's public image and really set the company apart from its multi-million-dollar, consulting competitors. So Brian Fugere, he gathered feedback from his clients and tried to understand what his company could be doing better. He expected to hear about service offerings or industry knowledge, but instead the primary complaint was that it was essentially about the consultant's style of communications. He kept hearing the same thing, so much bullshit. Deloitte consultants had effectively stopped talking like humans and instead had got into this flow of dry, generic communications, and that had just really seeped into the company culture at Deloitte. So he wanted to bring humanity back into the business. So to do this, him and his team developed this software that essentially called out the bullshit in employees' writing. So they set about compiling this dictionary of the most objectionable jargon. Among the worst offenders were words like leverage, bandwidth, incentives, leading edge, and robust. They then wrote this software that would scan employees' writing and actually spit out an index score. So the software would provide also helpful alternatives that employees could use instead of using this jargon. So this software, illustrated here in the slide, was playfully named Bullfighter. It went viral. It wasn't only extensively downloaded internally, but also had over 40,000 external downloads. And the results were noticeable almost immediately with Deloitte's clients. So bullfighter served as a reminder to stop using words that transform us from funny, honest and engaging weekend people, as I think we all shared a few minutes ago on the Mentimeter, into boring business stiffs. And this is just one example. I'm going to share now how there are many other ways that you can put your funny to work without using word scanning software. I will at this moment say, if you have any questions, comments or thoughts, please pop them in the chat. I'm really happy to keep this as a two-way informal conversation presentation. Okay, so how else can we inject a bit of levity and then humor into the workplace? You may have heard of callbacks. So a callback has come to mean a joke or a line that refers to something that happened earlier. So Seinfeld, you may be familiar with the Seinfeld show with Jerry Seinfeld. This is a show built around stand-up comedy, and it was one of the first sitcoms to regularly use callbacks in its scripts. So, for example, a story from the book Humour Seriously talks about an interviewee, an interviewee in terms of the research. So there's essentially Daria, who was an employee, and her boss shared a joke that the client deliverable that she was working on may not be perfect, but at least her hair would be. And later that evening, Daria emails back her boss with the completed deliverables for her work and this callback. So she says, attached is the updated deck. As per our chat this morning, this would be a great tool to start the conversation we need. Let me know if the deck needs revising or if it now matches my hair. Perfect. So the boss responds to Daria, Daria, no revisions needed, matched your hair perfectly, with beautiful hair always, Sega. So Sega, the boss, he not only acknowledged her levity, but he also built on her levity with his email sign-off. So if you're looking for a levity shortcut in the workplace, there is always the callback. Another method is to spice up your sign-off. So your email sign-off says a lot about you. Sends out a subtle signal about your status, your affect, and sign-offs are prime real estate for levity. And here are some examples. When asking a favor, you could sign off with fingers and toes crossed. When apologizing for slow response, sheepishly. When in heads down mode, yours heavily caffeinated. Also, I want to mention the PS at the end of a sign-off email. So in a series of mail studies, a researcher found that 90% of people read the postscript rather than the body of the letter first, meaning that your PS is likely to be your recipient's first impression. And the same is true for email. A PS is an impactful way to slip a little levity into an otherwise serious email. Often something quite random can do the trick. Simply naming something that's true for you here and now, like PS, it's hot in Tucson, or PS, it's still raining in Wales, can just be a subtle indicator that you're a person and not a robot. So this is, I guess, a nice illustration of the difference between levity, it's still raining in Wales, and humor. So it's like levity is setting the stage here, setting a platform for the humor to take place. And it also invites a bit of playfulness in return. So I have really enjoyed, since reading this book and understanding this research a little bit, how to work with sign-offs. And I'm showing one on the board here that was recently used in the Easter by myself. So I say, hi there. I'll be cruising down a chocolate river in the name of Easter until Tuesday, 6th of April. Yours will be my favorite email to respond to upon my return. Another semester ends, all targets met, all papers published, all students delighted, all pigs fed and ready to fly. Warmest, Rebecca. I will admit this was my internal email sign-off. For my external email sign-off, I didn't include this piece because I was just concerned non-academics it might be misinterpreted. So I did edit it for the external, but that's just a simple kind of way that you can personalize your out of office response. Another way to work with humor in the workplace is in terms of impression management and those important first meetings. So our brains make judgments very quickly, and the impression you make in an initial meeting has a crucial role on influencing the trajectory of your relationship. So it's important not to leave those first meetings to chance. When preparing for the business meeting, look for clues that will help you make a personal connection with this person, such as what are they passionate about? What are their unique experiences? And if possible, what is their sense of humor? So the image on the slide here is of Damon John. He loves dad jokes. He's also an entrepreneur, the founder of Fubu, and an investor on Shark Tank. An impressive and potentially quite intimidating person to meet with for the first time. And that is why Billie Jean Shaw did his research when preparing to meet John and landed on a non-traditional way to impress him. He scoured John's Twitter in advance of his meeting and noticed that John had a number of posts about his love for dad jokes. Before the meeting, Billie brought a book on dad jokes and read it, and also made personal notes in the margins of the book about what were his favorite jokes. In the first meeting, he gave this book to John and thanked him for his time. Billie's gesture really made an impression with John. It was such a sweetly personal gesture, it couldn't help but hit home in a very special way. And out of that, these two men became really solid friends through this goofy bond. Another technique to get levity into your workplace is your personal bio. So if we don't get the opportunity to meet an important person or a meaningful person in person, we perhaps don't have that opportunity. So let's think of the example. Let's say we're applying for a job. You might be one of hundreds or even thousands of equally qualified candidates. It's often the little things like making the person at the other end of the hiring process smile that can get you through the door for that first conversation. Research from the Stanford MBA program shows that a clever and witty line or two in an already impressive bio makes readers perceive the applicant as more intelligent, more likable, and more desirable as a colleague. So levity can be used to show you're a multi-dimension human person who's not only skilled and talented, but also funny to be around. So how do we actually put humor in a professional bio? So the research is indicating you just want to use it sparingly, like salt and pepper when you're flavoring your dish that you're cooking. So it's often best to save levity to the end, and then no one will see it coming. So choose your content strategically. So perhaps say you will be perceived to your future colleagues as being overconfident or even intimidating to them. So therefore, a small amount of self-deprecating humor may do the trick. But if you're going to self-deprecate, make sure it's something unrelated to your work. So if you're going for so I know we've got a lot of different people on the call here: academics, medics, execs, students, managers, engineers, analysts. So if you're going for an analyst job, you probably wouldn't make a self-deprecating joke about your math skills. You might make a self-deprecating joke about your cooking skills or your gardening skills or something like that. Humor can also be used to get your foot in the door. This is a picture of Sarah Blakely. She's the founder and CEO of Spanx. In the very early days, Sarah faced a significant challenge of getting prominent retailers to carry their product in their stores. It wasn't an easy sell. Spanx was an unknown product entering a crowded market. With limited funds and connections, she was just cold calling retailers and no one would return her calls. Sarah was convinced that all she needed was 5 minutes on the phone with a buyer to sell her product, but this was just easier said than done. So she went to the post office and mailed the buyers a single high-heeled shoe with a handwritten message that read, "Just trying to get my foot in the door. I'd like a few minutes of your time," followed by her phone number. And it worked. In the US, the buyer from Neiman Marcus was so taken by the gag that he called her back, and the deal that they made helped to build legitimacy in the eyes of other competing retailers. And within a year, Sarah had accounts with every store on her initial list and more. the ask and the nudge. So people, especially powerful people, often react to asks by shutting off, mostly as a defense mechanism, perhaps to protect themselves or their time. But give them the gift of laughter, even if it's just a smile, and it can really open them up. This principle holds true when you've made the ask and it's time for the nudge. So think about a time when you've had to send an email like, "Hi, just following up on this," or "Hey, just checking the status on that." And it's just really painful situations for both sides. I actually tried this approach in Cardiff with one of my very dear colleagues. So I was asking for a couple of pieces of equipment for working from home. And I was doing a lot of sort of polite, continual nudging after I'd made the ask, and no equipment was showing up. And yeah, it just got a bit tricky and awkward. So after reading this book, I actually sent my colleague this meme inspired by Adele saying, "Hello from the other side. I must have meowed 1,000 times." That's all I sent him. And no word of a lie, the next morning after I sent this meme, he got back to me. He really appreciated it. And most of my equipment then, a few days later arrived. So I will forever be using this meme. And also, I think the dialogue had started to I don't know, it was just, our interaction was just going downhill, and this really kind of revived it. So yeah, I guess the lesson is that a funny or light-hearted nudge can often get a faster reply than something that's, yes, polite, but also quite bland. And it doesn't have to be hilarious or even cat related. It just has to let the levity do the work. Humour can also be a really powerful form of idea generation. So in the words of the Dalai Lama, laughter is good for thinking because when people laugh, it's easier for them to admit new ideas to their mind. So let's take a closer look at this notion and consider it in the business world. And let's look at it through the example of a bad brainstorm. So Teller AI is a pioneer of S, formerly known as Google X. Teller's organization creates new technology aimed at improving the lives of billions of people and solving some of the world's biggest problems. As such, a healthy and productive approach to unlocking new ideas is crucial for organizational success. So Teller encourages his employees to come up with bad ideas. He says, if I say to if my team, go brainstorm good ideas, then people will think, oh God, everything I say has to be good. And there's this kind of pressure. Using the word good puts limits on the way his team thinks. But if he requests the silly ideas from people, they often come up with crazier and often better solutions. So it's only by freeing ourselves from the pressure to be normal or serious that we're often able to unlock our most creative selves. When your brain senses your silliest thoughts, it also senses your most brilliant thoughts. So how does humor show up with leadership? As leaders, by channeling our unique sense of humor, we can better unite, persuade, motivate, and inspire people, and ultimately be the types of leaders that people want to follow. A study in 2019 by the Harvard Business Review survey found that 58% of employees trust a complete stranger more than they trust their own boss. And 45% of them cited this lack of trust as the single biggest issue impacting their work performance. And leaders agree, 55% of CEOs feel this lack of trust is a threat to organizational growth. Humor helps instill trust in leadership. How does it do this? Let's look at an example. So in 2014, Richard Branson was hosting a series of meetings at his home on Necker Island in the Caribbean. These meetings were to inform the elders, a group formed by Nelson Mandela, to work towards global peace and human rights. These brainstorming sessions included Archbishop Desmond Tutu, President Jimmy Carter, Peter Gabriel, and other world leaders. Leading up to the event, Richard's team had planned every detail of the meetings, elaborate daily schedules, and really heavily researched presentations. But Richard had other ideas. The night before the event, Richard and Peter Gabriel took one look at the presentations and binned them. Richard and Peter said they wanted to make this event more human. Richard insisted on changing the agenda to make half the day work and half the day play. This idea seemed ludicrous. World leaders were flying in from around the world and dedicating their time, and Richard wanted them to spend half their time playing. As it turned out, in the afternoons of play was where the real work happened. Notably, as Archbishop Tutu and President Carter sat together on the beach with their feet in the sand, the two men created the founding values for the elders. It was in this moment that the levity led to profound results. Richard had made space for the leaders to think, dream, and create. Richard believes that it's in these serious moments with the greatest leaders of a generation discussing some of the most intractable global problems are the ones in which levity is needed most. In this case, the leaders not only had fun together, creating a lasting bond built on mischief, they often did a whole lot of good for humanity. And this is among many stories of leaders that inject levity into a situation, dripping with seriousness and with very powerful results. And the academic data backs up these results, even in the most dramatic circumstances. So to a point that many of you raised on the Mentimeter, so this is when we were asking, what holds you back from being funny at work? There's a lot of gray areas at Humour. We don't want, a lot of gray areas to navigate when we're thinking and delivering humour or just interacting in a humorous situation. So the next segment of this presentation is really looking at the differences in the perceptions of humour, what causes these differences and how they play out, and what to do when these differences show up. So we all have different tastes and sensibilities. You may feel that practical jokes are too taboo to bring to work, whereas your colleagues are maybe consistently impersonating the Prime Minister. What we find funny and appropriate, it's far from universal. And research asks that what holds people back from being humorous at work is often this worry that we're going to inadvertently cross a line. And, we're not wrong to have this worry. We don't want to tease in the wrong context or, because that could weaken different relationships rather than strengthen them. So in the next few minutes, I'm going to, sort of discuss a little bit more about, looking at when humour fails and how we can navigate these humour fails by understanding its nuances and how we can essentially make humour less risky and make it more versatile. We know that what constitutes appropriate and inappropriate humour is highly subjective. And this is a product of a host of factors like our different experiences, backgrounds, culture, political leanings, and so much more. So how do we take all these factors into account and how do we walk the line without tumbling over it? So truth, pain, and distance were three key components that Anne Libera, a director at Second City Theatre and also professor at Columbia College Chicago. So she says that if applied correctly, these three components can be a source of brilliant humour, but if misapplied, they can often offend and divide. So understanding them is key in order to shift your humour according to status, context, and situation. And also understanding in retrospect why your humour may have crossed the line. So let's unpack these a bit more. So with truth, this is about the heart of comedy. So we laugh at what's true, we laugh at what we recognise. At the same time, a painful truth without enough distance can come across as insensitive, hurtful, and offensive. Pain. For some, finding humour in our pain can be cathartic. For others, it can just bring up old feelings we'd rather not relive. And finally, distance. This is a measure of how far an individual or group is from the subject of your humour. For instance, was the joke told too soon? Is it geographically close? So a close joke would be a joke about myself or a joke about my spouse, or taking it to the other extreme, it could be a joke about someone who's completely different to myself on the other side of the world. Or psychologically, so how relevant is it to our personal experience? So to see how these three elements, truth, pain, and distance, interact, I'm going to use this example of the tweet that's on the slide here. So was this intended to be funny, and was it appropriate? So the tweet is, Cisco just offered me a job. Now I have to weigh the utility of a fatty paycheck against the daily commute to San Jose and hating the work. So if we think about distance, so it may be seen as harmless if the tweeter has a private Twitter account that only her friends can see. You know, there's this idea that it can be healthy to vent to your friends. Also, with the idea of distance, alternatively, what if this tweet had been public and the tweeter is, of course, making fun of a company that she's about to join, and it could be offensive to a Cisco employee, and hence they might question why they're wanting to hire her. It's relatively easy to see the truth in this statement. It shows this trade-off and also the pain that we all have to think about when navigating work-life balance. But if you remove the humor, the employee is essentially saying that working here sucks, and if it weren't for the pay, I wouldn't be here. So this was in fact a public tweet, and a Cisco employee did see it, and the tweeter's offer was rescinded. So thinking about the pain component, so pain and distance are very closely linked in the amount that the distance will indicate how painful the topic will be for the audience. So the joke teller's distance from a topic is an indication of how appropriate the topic is to joke about. So in-group membership comes with permission to say certain things that someone who isn't a member of that group doesn't get to say. For instance, women can make jokes about women, but men can't. Older people can make jokes about the elderly that young people can't, so on and so forth. But are there some things that are just too painful to joke about? And how do we know when it's too soon to joke about them? For example, as illustrated on the right-hand side of this slide, The Onion's 9/11 issue was published 2 weeks after the 9/11 attacks. Not only did it feel too soon to laugh, but on the surface, making light of attacks so soon seems insensitive and inappropriate. So the country and the world was in mourning, and the pain was intense, and the distance was just non-existent. Yet, a research study of students has found that the headline captured the shock and devastation and helpless experiences with a very careful twist. For instance, if you take a look at the bottom right, we can see how they, not knowing what to do, women bakes American flag cake. So it was a reminder that the more we hurt, the more we need to laugh. One student said, it gave me comic relief when I needed it to help me process something unimaginable. This other headline at the top left reads, hugging up 76,000%, shows people coming together in a difficult time. So here, and very importantly, the comedians that were writing these headlines, they weren't joking about the pain, but they were joking about the love in response to the pain. So the gray areas of humor, they are confusing, they are messy, they are constantly shifting. So the best you can do is just to examine the truth. What if you remove the humor from the truth? Does it still feel appropriate to share? Examine the pain and distance. How great is the pain? Is the distance enough to laugh about, or does it hit too close to home? Am I close enough to the personal group? Or do I have enough personal experience with the source of the pain to feel confident joking about it? So still on the topic of the grey areas of humour, again, I want to tell quite a pragmatic story about how you can really navigate these grey areas by talking through this kind of life cycle that humour has. And I'm going to do this by giving a short story. So Thomas was the CEO of a small digital media company with 35 employees. And he had a problem employee, which was Jackie. Everyone on Jackie's team let Thomas know that she was just not performing to the standard of the team. She was showing up late, leaving early, missing deadlines, and just not following through with her work. For several months, Thomas gave Jackie specific and actionable feedback. When she still wasn't improving, Thomas made the hard decision to fire her. The team felt it coming for a while. So in a way, it was a collective sigh of relief, but there was also a bit of sadness and just a bit of unknown in terms of how they're going to deal with the workload, because there was no discussion of a replacement. In the first big team meeting following the firing of Jackie, Jackie's absence was palpable. So to cut the tension, Thomas opened the meeting with, "Take it away, Jackie." The atmosphere that line created was toxic. Then one courageous colleague stood up and said, "I don't think that was funny." Thomas had dropped the humour bomb and he realised it immediately. He realised that a more productive response to deal with the atmosphere would have just been to talk openly about what happened and ask everyone how they're feeling. Thomas acted swiftly to rectify his joke. He declared, "You're absolutely right, and I'm so sorry." Thomas acknowledged that joking had come from his desire to ease the tension, but it wasn't the moment and the right way to do it. His apology was sincere and immediate, and his colleagues were very forgiving. Instead, he asked how they felt. He explained about Jackie's departure and how it would influence their workload, and that they should come to him if he has any concerns. So I guess to summarize, recovering from a humour fail, such as Thomas's example, there's this 3-step process to recognize what happened, diagnose what went wrong, and to make it right. Okay, so the final piece I'm going to talk about in terms of the grey areas of humour is context switching. So how appropriate humour is often shifts with power. For instance, jokes that you make as a middle manager may not land as a CEO. Research shows how leaders struggle with this relationship between their humour and their status. As you rise in status, certain targets of humour become off limits. When you tease someone of higher status, you appear brave and confident. When you tease someone of lower status, you may come across as a bully. So this lady on the slide here is April Underwood. She's Chief Product Officer at Slack. She says at Google and Twitter, when she was working there, she was always punching up. She says her sense of humour allowed her to spar with colleagues in a way that brought levity to a situation and humanised the leaders in the room. But then when she moved on and went to work for Slack, she led a team of 100 and reported directly to the CEO, and there was nowhere for her to punch up. So she realised that this kind of humour she was previously using just would no longer instill trust and may be seen as intimidating. Often humour from the top can take the form of self-deprecation. I've mentioned this a couple of times. And this shows that leaders are confident enough to poke fun at their own flaws. So for them, it can enhance their sense of, or how they're perceived in terms of being more higher in status, higher in power, and having more humility. Conversely, when people of lower status self-deprecate, it can diminish perceptions of their status, as others might interpret their comments as insecurity. So finally, as a rule of thumb, as you move up the totem pole, make fun of others less and make fun of yourself more. Recognizing failed humour is really important, and recognizing derogatory humour is really crucial. It's not crucial just for us as individuals, but also for us as a broader society. So it's clear that racist, sexist, or otherwise prejudiced humour is cruel, offensive, and just inappropriate in any context. And yet most of us, I'm sure, have experienced a time when humour really crossed a line, and when someone justified an off-colour remark with, "Oh, it's just a joke, I don't really believe that." So although it might feel more comfortable to let those moments slide, there is a danger in staying silent. And research shows that mere exposure to disparaging identity-based humor is likely to perpetrate prejudice in people who are already predisposed to it. Next, on the slide, I've talked about blood laughter, how this is a real risk. So blood laughter is when someone misinterprets your joke as some commentary on a slur or a stereotype, but sees it as an endorsement. And this is why the following rule holds. So don't make another person's identity the prop, plot, point, or punchline of a joke. So in short, great humor comes with great responsibility. So to summarize this class, I'm gonna leave you with a short story about research that was actually conducted amongst people who were dying in a hospice. And the researchers asked them, what were your regrets in life? And this is what they shared. So they wished that they'd been more bold. So how does humor relate to all of these points? So humor helps us be more bold by helping us tackle fear and opening us up to change and possibility. It empowers us to really quickly bounce back from setbacks. They wish they'd been more authentic. Humor empowers us to share parts of ourselves that are risky, unconventional, and authentic. Presence. So we are wired to focus very often on the past or on the future, but humor really helps to remind us to stay in the present moment, because if you're not in the present moment, it's going to be a lot harder to capture those humorous moments. I wish I had more joy is what they shared. So joy is not an accident, but largely a choice. So something that we allow ourselves to seek and to find. And when you don't take yourself too seriously, then joy can really flow. And finally, love. They wanted to love more. There are a few tiny acts as easy and as generous as sharing a laugh with someone. And these moments, while fleeting, they are tiny expressions of love. And this also builds the path to trust to help strengthen relationships. So essentially, a life full of purpose and meaning is a life full of humor and levity. So with that, I'd love to thank you all for your time, your engagement, your attention. And yeah, I'll open the floor to any comments. If you want to talk further on this topic, I'd be really excited to do so. This is my email, scotr3@cardiff.ac.uk. And with that, I'm going to stop share and open the floor to questions.
So we do have a question that's come in, but I'd encourage anyone, if they do have any more questions, just to use the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. But the first question, Rebecca, is how do you handle a superior who seems to believe that humour indicates a person is not taking things seriously?
Oh, sorry, what was the last bit of that? How do you deal with a boss who's...
Yeah, how do you deal with a boss who believes that humour indicates that a person isn't taking things seriously?
Oh, you can suggest this book to your boss and then they will be full of all the knowledge. Yeah, and I think that's a really common myth that, and I think that sometimes humor can be overused. I guess I should have put a little bit more emphasis on this idea that humor really is like the seasoning of our cooking, if you will. It just needs to be used in balance and sparingly. So I'm sure there are situations where, people can use humor excessively, and then that can perhaps lead to a lack of productivity. But I think if it's the case where, someone is effectively, consistently using humor and that's just being misinterpreted, or perhaps the boss isn't comfortable with that for whatever reason, yeah, I mean, I just think you could inform the boss of some fabulous recent research that shows that there's many benefits to being funny at work, such as the points we've talked today. It's fantastic for trust, relationship building, leadership, being creative, building a network. So recommending the book Humour seriously would be a starting point, or please feel free to email me individually, and I'd be really happy to share some more specific academic journal articles, because perhaps you're in a certain industry, right? Like maybe it's in the automotive industry. There have been quite a lot of, studies amongst different age groups in different parts of the world. So I think just sharing knowledge, and not in an obnoxious way, but just like, hey, look what I've learned. And just, I think because a lot of us don't know about the benefits of humor, and it is a myth that, you're not a serious, credible business person if you're being, humorous all the time. So yeah, I think that's just a case of starting a conversation with the boss about the insights.
Okay, fab, thank you. We've had a couple more come through, so I'm just sort of taking them as they come through, really. So the next one, as someone who is young and a woman, I can be nervous to lean into humour too much, as I already worry I am seen as not serious or committed enough. Personally, would rather be funny and fun to be around than boring at work, but it can be hard not to fall back on being serious when you're anxious to please and seen as a professional. Do you have any tips on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Such a practical one that I think most of us can have been there. I think I was definitely there a few years ago as a more early career researcher. I loved humor, but I just didn't know what to do with it. And yeah, when you're perhaps not so confident, or you're maybe early career, it's not a high priority to use it, or it's not something that you're more comfortable with. What I would really recommend is just, like I mentioned at the start, really lower the bar. So it's not about you making people laugh. It's just about you perhaps reflecting on perhaps the questions we talked today, maybe learning and reflecting more on what it is to be in a state of levity. So just looking for avenues of humor. So just being more, and that could just be like smiling at a colleague who's perhaps spilling their coffee everywhere and swearing to themselves in the corner. I mean, we're not visually seeing our colleagues, a lot of us aren't, at least anyway, but just being more open to smile. How I personally have navigated this same challenge is doing little things at work, such as the out of office email. I mean, hopefully, you're getting a bit of holiday, so you're able to every now and again at least put your out of office on. I know that's not always something that a lot of people feel comfortable to do at work, because sometimes you have to always be available. You could practice amongst your friends, things like the out of office and how you just respond to messages amongst friends, and build up that way. So yeah, the sign-offs or the PSs. So you could practice that with a group that you are comfortable with. And when you get some positive feedback and build your confidence, then start to share that with your colleagues that you're more comfortable with, and slowly, hopefully, that will mushroom out.
Great, thank you. Next question, are there any differences between how the genders use humour differently, other than dad jokes?
That's a really good question. I'm sure there are. I honestly don't know the answer to that question. The research that I haven't read research on that, but I'm sure there would be. So that's a brilliant question. I'm really sorry I can't honour that very well.
And on the theme of cultural differences, we've got a question here. Thank you for the engaging presentation. English is my second language, and I am having a hard time in the UK to adapt to the British humour. Sometimes the cultural gap causes the jokes to be misunderstood. I would really appreciate your suggestions.
Yeah, I really hear that. And that's been sort of brought up by a couple of my colleagues as well. How do we navigate this cross-cultural humour gap potentially? And also, yeah, we completely hear you with the language, because humour is so nuanced. I know this sounds silly, but hey, that's the topic of what we're talking about today. I would perhaps watch some or listen to some, you could do this on a podcast, you could watch some like classic British old school comedies. I'm thinking things like Absolutely Fabulous, Fawlty Towers, Only Fools and Horses. That would perhaps give you a little bit of a fun educational foundation as to how British humour kind of unfolds. And I think there's a lot of fabulous podcasts as well, and audiobooks as well. So I think that would help you understand the cultural context in which British humour, and at the same time, hopefully, I can't remember if there was a language struggle there as well, but I mean, that would also sort of reinforce this nuance and clever wordage that often can be really tricky when you're looking cross-culturally. And also following perhaps British comedians and improv comedians as well.
Okay, so I'm just going to do one last question because I'm conscious we are running slightly over time. So the last question is, I frequently get quoted that people cannot read if I am serious in written communication. How is it best to ensure the message is interpreted correctly without the use of emojis?
Good question. And my honest answer with this would just be to perhaps create like a little folder, if you can, of good GIFs. So we saw the illustration, it doesn't have to be a GIF, sorry, a meme, something visual. So we saw the illustration in the presentation about hello from the outside. I must have meowed 1,000 times. So just that simple kind of cat story does hopefully convey and cuts through perhaps some, I think it just tells a clearer story than what text would do. So I think go beyond like emojis. I think emojis can often be quite limiting. So feel free to put an image in there, I think GIFs may be a bit limiting. It depends on who your recipient is, but yeah, images, memes, yeah, but be creative with it. And I think that is really going to humanize you. I think we can really go beyond text and this kind of heavy corporate verbiage that we're all just get used to using every day, because it is efficient, but in the broad picture, it's probably not the most efficient in terms of us forming real human relationships with our colleagues.
Oh, that's great. I've actually got cat memes and bullfighter on my to-do list. So
good, nice.
So yeah, that's just that's the end of the session. So it's just left to me to say a big thank you to our speaker Rebecca for these really interesting insights. I hope everyone enjoyed the session as much as I did. I thought it was really interesting. Also, thank you very much to everyone who's attended this session as well. If you would like to engage with the business school, there's many ways to do so. So we run lots of free to attend breakfast briefing sessions that cover a range of different topics that you're more than welcome to sign up to. We've also got a good range of different executive education courses, things like the Executive MBA, we've got a shorter LBA, and also a Masters in Public Leadership, which I've been told we can offer a small discount towards for the attendees of this session. So we'll send some of those details out around how you can engage with the business school in different ways after this session. And finally, at the end of the week, we're looking to send out an evaluation survey for the session. So any feedback that you have whatsoever would be greatly appreciated. We do read them, and we are looking to do something similar to this spring online school in the future. So it'd be great if you could fill those in and return them. So thank you very much, Rebecca, and thank you to our attendees.
Phil. Thank you everyone for attending. Really appreciate the opportunity to share this. I hope it's been useful.
Thanks everyone. Goodbye.